Hello students, this is Miss Ruiz. Today we're going to do part 3 and the last part, the last video notes for the integer exponent properties. So please make sure that you are titling, let me change that. This is actually part 3. So make sure you're titling your page and putting today's date. If you have room, you can add these on to the last notes. If not, just start on a fresh page. All right, so today we're going to go over the last two properties that we need to make sure that we go over thoroughly. And then in class, we'll continue practicing and putting them all together. So the first one today that we're going to talk about is called the power of a power rule. This one here. And it's the power of a power. And so that rule or that integer exponent property tells us that to raise a power to a power, so that means you're going to have two exponents, we multiply the exponent. So here's my example. I have 4 squared, and that entire exponent, 4 squared, or 4 to the power of 2, is being raised to the power of 6. So if you look there, we actually have two exponents. One inside the parentheses, one outside the parentheses. And so what we do there is multiply. So we keep our base the same that's inside, and then you're going to multiply the two exponents. 2 times a 6, and that gives us 4 to the 12. Okay, so giving this in exponential form. Most of these answers are going to be left in exponential form, unless you're asked to put it in standard form. So that would be 4 to the 12. Okay, so let's practice a few of these of the power to the power rule. I've got some here set up. So why don't you pause the video, try these, and then see if you've got them correct. Okay, so there's a base in the first one. The base is x, and it's being raised to the third power, and that entire exponent is being raised to the second power. So in order to do this one, let me get the right color, I'm going to keep the base the same, and I'm going to multiply 3 times 2, and so that's going to be x to the 6th. All right, the next one, same thing. You keep the base the same, and you multiply the exponents. 2 times 4 equals 8. And on the last one, we have the base of z, and I see 2 exponents, so I'm going to multiply them, and that's 5 times 2 is going to give me 10. So that would be z to the 10th. Okay? So what I want you to really notice here is what these look like before you even start. You see that there is inside parentheses, you have a base and you have an exponent. Now you could have it could look a little bit different with different numbers in them. You could have different letters, but just make sure that you're recognizing that there is the entire exponent inside the parentheses is being raised to another power outside of the parentheses, and we multiply that when that happens. Okay, we'll try more of these in class together. And the last integer exponent we call power of a product. Hopefully, we remember that product. When we see product, we're talking about multiplication. Okay, and so the multiplication in this is where you have bases that are being multiplied inside the parentheses. So I want you to notice the difference between the one we just did, where you have two exponents and we multiply them. In this case, you have two bases that are being multiplied. So inside I have 4 times 5, which would be 20. So instead of multiplying those, because everything is being raised to the 6th power, I would take each base, so 4 and the 5 are the bases, and I raise each base to 6. Okay? And I can leave this in exponential form, but just remember that in between those bases, we need to keep the multiplication that we saw happening inside. Okay. Most often than not, you will not see the dot for multiplication because we're usually multiplying variables with numbers. So let's take a look at what those would look like. Okay, so this is practice for the power to the power rule. This is more like what we're going to see most often. Okay, so it is multiplication. Whenever you have two variables or two letters that are being multiplied, we don't normally put a dot in between because they're two letters, and if they're stuck together, they're against each other, that indicates multiplication. So I have x times y. So this is one letter times another one number times another number, and I don't know the value of those numbers. I don't necessarily need to know the value of those numbers. I just know that two different numbers are being multiplied together. So when they're multiplied together, that means I'm going to be raising each one of these to that variable. The variable in this case, or exponent in this case, is m. So I'm going to raise x to the power of m, and I'm going to multiply that times y to the power of m. Okay. You can write this without the dot, and you probably see me do that in class. I would just have written this as like this. Not necessary to put the dot in between because I know this is multiplication. All right, why don't you try the next two? You try them and pause the video, try it, and then come back and see if you got it right. All right, so now we have here, I have a multiplication of 2 times a, and all of that is being raised to the third power. So let's take a look at how I would do that. I'm going to take this exponent of 3, and I'm going to raise each factor inside of the parentheses to the power of 3. And that's going to look like this. 2 cubed times a cubed. Okay. And so I see that this is something that I'll be able to simplify a little bit more. If I'm being asked to simplify as much as I can write 2 cubed in standard form. That would be 8. And then the a to the third will have to remain in exponential form because I don't know the value of a. Okay. So either one of these is correct depending on how you're being asked to simplify the problem. Okay. And lastly here, I have 6 times x to the third. So I want you to know, wait a minute, I didn't write this properly. I also have an exponent here on the outside. Okay, sorry about that. So this is 6 times x to the third, and all of this is being raised to the power of 2. So it's really important to notice here that you have an exponent inside the parentheses. So here we can start combining this with the power rule that we just learned. So I'm going to first distribute this 2 to everything that's inside the parentheses. So there's going to be 6 squared, and then x to the third is also going to be squared. So I need to put that in parentheses so I can square it. Now, if you take a look, you can simplify this a little bit more. 6 squared, well, we know that's 6 times 6, and that's 36. And then x cubed to the second power. Well, if you take a look at that, that is the same rule we were using here on the power to a power rule. So I can use the power to the power rule on this one, and pause it and see if you remember how to do the power to the power rule. Okay, so hopefully you paused it and you remembered that the x cubed to the power of 2, when you have these two powers, we just multiply them. So that would be x, and then 3 times 2 would give me 6, and that would be your final answer, fully simplified. So we're going to be simplifying these in class. We're going to be putting together all in one problem, or many of the rules or the properties that we've learned, to see if you can identify them when they're all mixed together. So we'll practice these a lot in class. I'll see you in the next class.